In this pod-slice summary of the Ben Shapiro Show, he discussed the IDF's, Israel Defense Forces, recent discovery of a tunnel system beneath TC Hospital in Gaza used by Hamas for military operations. In addition to the tunnels, the IDF found evidence of a highly sophisticated facility, complete with bulletproof doors, electricity supplied by solar panels, and even explosives. Discussing a video clip from the site, Shapiro highlighted the disturbing evidence exposed, which included operational gear of Hamas, such as explosives, vests stuffed with explosives, hand grenades, and objects that were probably used to hold hostages. He also commented on how the discovery unfolded, describing the found location of baby bottles and diapers, which were believed to be potentially used for baby hostages. The elements showed the basement of the hospital had been improvised with ventilation and infrastructures like toilets, a shower, and a small kitchen which appeared to have been tailored to serve both as a hideout for terrorists and a spot where hostages may have been kept. Shapiro spoke further, providing details on a list found, written in Arabic, which signified an operation against Israel that commenced on the 7th of October. The list seemed to enforcing regular shifts for the terrorists and guarding the hostages presumed to be held here. Shapiro drew attention to the involvement of the World Health Organization, noting the proximity of the unit to the site and questioned how their resources ended up in the hands of Hamas. He emphasized on Israel's measures to protect Gazan civilians by offering to evacuate the hospital. Shapiro voiced his concerns about the moral equivalence in the reportage on the war between Israel and Hamas. He underlined the fact that while Israel is striving to provide fuel, Hamas is actively stopping its entry. However, the media narrative often sides with sparing the hospitals without acknowledging how they're being used by Hamas. Shapiro concluded this segment by calling out Hamas's gross violation of the rules of war, especially their tactic of hiding among civilian populations. He credited the IDF for going above and beyond in their attempts to protect Gazan civilians, exemplified by the recent shipment of medical equipment into Gaza to assist with the ongoing crisis. Ultimately, he underscored the complex challenge that Israel is facing, addressing aggressions from a militant group that deliberately places its operations in civilian locations to exploit the lives of innocent people for their objectives. Ben Shapiro, in a continuation of his podcast, firmly criticized the media and those supporting Hamas's use of civilian infrastructure for warfare. He applauded the State Department spokesperson for confronting media members who appeared to support Hamas, calling out their misuse of hospitals and other civilian locations as command posts. He stressed that Hamas had declined an offer from Israel to provide fuel for a hospital, illustrating their disregard for the welfare of Gazan civilians. The discussion then moved to the topic of the IDF encountering the Hamas central headquarters, which was located beneath the Al-Shifa hospital. Details revealed by U.S. intelligence and reported by CNN indicated that Hamas had a command unit under the hospital. Its fighters routinely stay there, and the fuel intended for the hospital was used by the terrorist organization. Despite these revelations, President Biden showed reluctance towards any aggressive actions against the hospital, which puzzled Shapiro. He argued that Israel must take the hospital. Otherwise, it would be analogous to leaving Osama bin Laden's compound untouched due to the presence of children. Further, Shapiro lambasted the Biden administration for refusing to openly acknowledge that Israel is abiding by the laws of war. He perceived this hesitation as a ploy to assuage its left-wing base. He also expressed concern over the wavering stance of the U.S. administration amidst reports of growing radicalism from the left, citing Rep. Pramila Jayapal's open threat to the Biden administration for not pressuring Israel. He noted the potential political cost to the Biden administration, highlighting how key voter segments could be disillusioned. Lastly, Shapiro criticized a New York Times article for what he perceived as pro-Hamas propaganda, particularly the suggestion that Biden's electoral prospects could be impacted negatively if he did not adopt a more sympathetic view towards Hamas. Concluding, Shapiro suggested that congressional members who had staffers openly supporting Hamas should consider firing them, as they fundamentally misrepresent the oppressor-oppressed dynamic through their support for a recognized terrorist organization. In this section of The Ben Shapiro Show, the host, Ben Shapiro, continues to lay out critical observations surrounding the Israel and Hamas conflict. Exploiting the findings of the previous sections, Shapiro points out Vice President Kamala Harris's conspicuous support for the right of protesters who rally in favor of Hamas, a stance that appears at odds with her disapproval of protests against COVID-19 mandates and the Tea Party. Shapiro then moved on to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who, despite being largely favorable during the conflict, is seen as giving leeway to dissent within the State Department ranks. He cites a letter Blinken sent to the State Department acknowledging internal disagreements and articulates his dismay at the potential influence that these opposing views could have on U.S. foreign policy. Shapiro also debunks the body counts given by Hamas, citing Israel's historically rigorous verification processes and dismissing the terrorist organization's quick assembly of casualty numbers as a manipulative ploy. He maintains that such figures are used to generate sympathy and support for their cause, thereby pressuring the Biden administration. Shapiro criticizes Jeremy Corbyn, former head of the Labour Party in Britain, for refusing to identify Hamas as a terrorist group. He believes these patterns of thinking, which align with anti-Semitic and anti-Western conspiracy theories, are alarmingly accepted within leftist ideologies. Shapiro asserts that such mindsets excuse inflicting harm and justifies lies in pursuit of their perceived utopian goal. Lastly, Shapiro rebukes Linda Sarsour, one of the founders of the Women's March, for suggesting at a pro-Hamas protest that those posting images of children kidnapped by Hamas are provocateurs. He views this as an attempt to divert responsibility and accountability from those supporting Hamas. Ben Shapiro commends Israel's impressive progress in the Gaza Strip, citing the comprehensive destruction of Hamas's military capacity in the region's northern parts and the potential forthcoming expansion to southern Gaza. Emphasizing that the conflict will not last indefinitely, he contrasts this with Western sentimentality towards Hamas propaganda. Shapiro discusses instances of domestic anti-Semitism, referencing a Wall Street Journal article about growing tensions within the Chicago suburb of Skokie. As war rages in the Middle East, Shapiro highlights that this traditionally welcoming village is experiencing a test of tolerance between its Holocaust survivor descendants and its emerging Muslim populations. He criticizes the media's reluctance to determine a clear contrast between decency and indecency in escalating conflicts of this nature. In the political landscape, Shapiro discusses the current House Speaker, Mike Johnson, noting his imminent passing of a continuing resolution identical to those previously passed by previous Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Hypothesizing that Johnson's conservative agenda struggles due to a Democratic Senate and President and a slim majority in Congress. Ben critiques the lack of positive change resulting from McCarthy's removal. Shapiro concludes this segment by mentioning that Johnson's proposed clean CR does not include the supplemental spending requested by the Biden White House, which incorporates billions in foreign aid. He condemns the false belief that conservative policy can manifest through empty slogans, accusing politicians and commentators of misleading the public through unrealistic portrayals of legislative change. Continuing from the previous discussion, Shapiro criticizes costs associated with funding for Ukraine and Israel conflated by the Biden administration. He argues that these are distinct conflicts and deserve separate considerations. Furthermore, Shapiro acknowledges support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia, but he insists it's a different endgame compared to Israel's war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Shapiro voices his disappointment with the lack of decision-making ability in U.S. politics and condemns what he perceives as an ineffective decision-making structure. Representing this point, he cites the continued inability to enact a budget cut in Congress. The discussion proceeds with Shapiro expressing discontent towards the supposedly unsuccessful effort to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary. Mayorkas, according to Shapiro, is responsible for the collapse at the American border, a situation that has enabled millions of unauthorized immigrants to enter and reside within the country. However, 8 Republicans have voted against stopping the impeachment resolution, including significant figures like Ken Buck of Colorado. Discussing soccer star Megan Rapinoe, Shapiro refers to injuries incurred by Rapinoe and her subsequent comments regarding the existence of God. He dismisses her beliefs, stating sarcastically that her perspective on the atheistic viewpoint is proof of God's existence. Shapiro again scrutinizes the ethics of the Supreme Court, criticizing the instatement of an ethics code that would regulate the actions and behavior of the justices after reports of undisclosed trips and unorthodox favors. He suggests that this code, while may be seen as a measure to maintain transparency and accountability, risks corruption and misuse, and could potentially undermine the court's integrity. Lastly, he teases a discussion about questionable behavior among bank regulators, encouraging listeners to subscribe for more content from his show. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.